Summarise what Sir Keir Starmer has just said there and how significant it is.
In a word, it's growth. It's interesting listening to Sir Keir Starmer there. If you closed your eyes, you could have been listening to something that Liz Truss might have been saying for the last few weeks. The real focus of the Labour Party now seems to be not just on the redistributive element that everyone knows is part of Labour's philosophy, but also about growing the size of the economy. And this is a really crucial juncture now for the Labour Party to take, to recognise it's not just enough to share out a pie if that pie is relatively small. If you grow that pie and then share it out, the wealth that everyone has is so much bigger. I think some people might critique what Keir Starmer has been saying for its lack of clear detail, although it's hard to get into a lot of detail about the productivity reforms you might pursue in a speech that lasts around half an hour or so. But clearly the sense of direction here is an interesting one, and it picks up on this idea that is growing in economic circles around the UK, that really the UK could be doing a lot better when it comes to economic growth, that there's actually quite a lot of low-hanging fruit that we could pick that is sort of holding our country back right now in terms of the growth rate we could have. And it's interesting looking at the difference between, say, the 1% or indeed 0% growth we're expected next year. The conglomeration effects of even doubling that to 2% growth or 3% growth, it's huge, the amount of extra money that you then have to play with. I think the big question will be, now that it seems that the Labour Party is on board with economic growth is a good thing, which under Jeremy Corbyn there was a lot of questioning as to whether or not he did believe in economic growth. A lot of his thinkers and people around the Corbyn side of the Labour Party were saying, well, actually, economic growth could be a problem rather than a solution. Now the Labour Party clearly saying that growth is important. They'll fight the next election, they say now, on growth. I think the question very much now will turn to how they deliver it.
I'm a bit confused as to which party he'll be standing for in the next election.
He's been checkers to get that speech.
Yeah, I mean, he sounds like he's, standing to be a Tory leader, not the next Labour leader and Prime Minister. He seems to have moved considerably right compared to what we're used to from Labour over the last couple of years.
I think a lot of people would have heard a lot of Tony Blair, perhaps, in that speech. He spoke, yes, about growing the economy, but also about the sort of public sector involvement. And his Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, got into a bit of a mess this morning when on the radio she said that Labour would not nationalise the railways, for example. She then backtracked on that about an hour later, saying that actually rail nationalisation will still be on the table under a Labour government, which a lot of people would raise an eyebrow to as whether this is actually a very pro-business, pro-growth agenda. I think the detail here really does matter, and I suppose it's easy for politicians to say we want to grow the economy, but to get into exactly how that will be done, which regulations they'll lift, how they will boost productivity, that's a crucial question. But it's interesting looking at the Blairite thread of this speech, talking about the public-private partnerships, talking about government working with business. Now, some people might raise an eyebrow at that. We all remember the public-private partnerships that built some hospitals with dubious ways of funding them that ended up costing the taxpayer more later on. However, in other areas, public-private partnerships clearly have worked very well. So I think very much the broad brushstrokes of this speech are saying things that many people will be wanting to hear, that growth is something that is incredibly important to the United Kingdom and, frankly, that we haven't had enough of since 2008. But when it comes to how that will be delivered, I think the Labour Party still has more questions to answer.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Three-word motto there, Union flag lectern. I mean, what's he gone to? Political speeches for you?
I mean, the five points, to be concise, that he said he would characterise his leadership, the next Labour government, would be financial responsibility. Sounds a bit Tory. Distinctively British. Sounds a bit Tory. A partnership between state and market. Not quite Tory, but the fact he's putting market up there with the state, bit moving to the right. Spreading power, he alluded to levelling up.
Lots of levelling up in that.
And refocusing investment on boosting productivity. Again, he seems to have taken from the playbook of the 2019.
I think he just wants to be on that ballot paper, doesn't he?
Yeah, maybe.